I need to see the medical records for Jada Reeds.
Sir, I'll need to see a warrant or court order for that.
This police departmental letterhead should be enough.
Do you have a court order?
I'm afraid it's not. HIPAA regulations are very clear. Are you refusing to cooperate with the police investigation?
No, I am just doing my job, officer.
I will be back with a warrant.
I need to see the medical records for Jada Reeds. It's official police business. Sir, I'll need to see a warrant or court order for that. I'm a police officer. This is departmental letterhead. That should be enough. I'm afraid it's not. HIPAA regulations are very clear. Are you refusing to cooperate with a police investigation? The Medical Records Department of Mercy General Hospital was busy that Thursday afternoon. Filing cabinets stood against the walls next to modern computer screens, creating a mix of old and new ways of storing patient information. Sarah Thorne, the hospital administrator, sat at her desk looking over compliance reports when Officer Kevin Brooks walked through the door. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that showed he expected everyone to do exactly what he said. He wore his uniform like armor, his badge displayed prominently on his chest, his hand resting casually on his duty belt in a way meant to intimidate. Behind him, security cameras silently recorded every moment, cameras he either didn't notice or didn't think mattered. What happened in the next 12 minutes would be captured in crystal clear high-definition video, complete with audio that recorded every illegal demand, every privacy law violation, and every threat Brooks made to silence the hospital staff who dared question his authority. When the patient whose records he demanded, his ex-wife, Jada Reeds, discovered what he'd done, Brooks realized he had made the worst mistake of his life. Because Jada wasn't just any victim. She was a Harvard-educated attorney who specialized in healthcare privacy law and had built her entire career destroying people who did exactly what he'd just attempted. Before we continue, drop your location in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if this story matters to you, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will show you why you should never underestimate the power of the law when it's in the hands of someone who truly knows how to use it. This became one of the clearest cases of law enforcement abuse of medical privacy ever prosecuted, and the ending will leave you speechless. Because when a cop uses his badge to dig into his ex-wife's private medical files, forgetting she's the exact type of lawyer who can bury him, the fall from power isn't just hard, it's complete, devastating, and captured on camera for the whole world to see. Jada Reeds wasn't just any lawyer. At 38 years old, she was a partner at one of the most respected corporate law firms in the state, specializing in healthcare privacy law. She'd graduated from Harvard Law School at the top of her class and spent the last 15 years building a reputation that made hospital administrators and insurance companies call her first when they faced privacy violation lawsuits. She knew federal medical privacy law. Every single rule, every exception, every comma in the regulations that protected patient information. She'd represented major hospitals defending against privacy breaches and won multi-million-dollar cases for patients whose private health information had been exposed. If there was anyone in the state who understood how sacred medical records were supposed to be, it was Jada Reeds. But 2 years ago, her personal life had fallen apart in ways her professional success couldn't fix. After 8 years of marriage, she divorced Kevin Brooks. What had started as love and partnership had slowly turned into something dark and painful. Kevin had always been proud of her accomplishments at first, but over time, that pride became resentment. He couldn't handle that she made more money, that she had more education, that people respected her expertise. He became controlling, questioning where she went and who she talked to. Then came the infidelity, affairs he didn't even bother hiding well. The divorce was bitter and ugly, filled with accusations and anger. But the worst part was the custody battle over their 6-year-old daughter, Maya. Kevin fought viciously for custody, not because he wanted to be the primary parent, but because he couldn't stand the idea of Jada winning anything from him. 3 weeks ago, Jada had finally done something she'd been putting off for years. She underwent a hysterectomy at Mercy General Hospital to treat uterine fibroids. The condition had caused her severe pain for a long time, but she delayed the surgery because of work demands and the stress of the divorce. The procedure went well, but recovery was harder than she expected. She was physically exhausted, moving slowly, taking pain medication, and dealing with the emotional complexity of what the surgery meant for her body and her future. She'd taken medical leave from work for the first time in her career and was home healing, vulnerable in ways she wasn't used to being. Kevin learned about the surgery through Maya, who innocently mentioned that Mommy's in the hospital during one of his visitation weekends. For Kevin, this wasn't a moment to feel concern or compassion for the mother of his child. Instead, he saw opportunity. If he could somehow access Jada's medical records and find evidence of complications, strong medications, or anything that might suggest she was impaired or unstable, he could use it against her in custody court. He could paint her as too sick, too weak, too emotionally damaged to properly care for Maya. The custody hearing was scheduled in just 4 weeks, and Kevin was losing badly. His infidelity was documented in text messages and emails. His controlling behavior had been witnessed by Jada's friends and family. His own attorney had warned him that unless something dramatic changed, Jada would get primary custody. He was desperate, scrambling for any ammunition he could find to turn the case around. And in his mind, Jada's medical records represented his last chance, his final weapon to use against the woman who had dared to leave him and build a life he couldn't control. What Kevin didn't realize was that in trying to violate the privacy of a healthcare privacy attorney, he was about to make the biggest mistake of his entire life. Thursday, 2:47 p.m. Officer Kevin Brooks walked through the main entrance of Mercy General Hospital in full uniform, his badge gleaming under the bright hospital lights. He was on duty, using official work time for something entirely personal, a vendetta against his ex-wife disguised as police business. He moved with purpose through the hallways, his boots clicking against the polished floor as he headed straight for the medical records department, like a man who expected no resistance. Behind the desk sat Sarah Thorne, a hospital administrator with 20 years of experience at Mercy General. She'd been trained extensively in HIPAA compliance and had dealt with law enforcement requests before. She knew the rules, knew what was legal and what wasn't. Nearby, though Brooks didn't know it yet, was Dr. Marcus Lewis, the medical director. Marcus had met Jada years ago at a healthcare law conference and considered her a friend. He knew all about her expertise in privacy law and had heard plenty about her difficult ex-husband who happened to be a police officer. Brooks approached Sarah's desk and placed a piece of paper in front of her. Police department letterhead with an official-looking request form he'd created himself. "I need all medical records for Jada Reeds," he said firmly. "It's relevant to an ongoing investigation." Sarah looked at the form, then back at Brooks. "Sir, I'll need to see a warrant or a court order for that." Brooks's jaw tightened. "I'm a police officer conducting an active investigation. This is departmental letterhead. That should be sufficient." "I'm afraid it's not," Sarah said calmly, though her heart was beating faster. "HIPAA regulations require proper legal authorization before we can release patient records to law enforcement." Brooks leaned forward, his voice rising. "Are you refusing to cooperate with a police investigation? Because that's obstruction of justice." He moved closer to her desk, invading her personal space in a way clearly meant to intimidate. "This is time-sensitive. If you interfere with police business, there will be consequences." Sarah held her ground, but she could feel the pressure. Brooks continued, lowering his voice like he was sharing something confidential. "Look, this involves a child endangerment investigation. The patient, Jada Reeds, is on medications that might affect her ability to safely care for her minor child. I need to verify what she's taking for the child's safety." It was a complete lie, and Brooks knew it. But he also knew that mentioning a child often made people cooperate faster. Sarah hesitated, uncertain. Brooks pressed harder, using official-sounding jargon designed to confuse and overwhelm her. Under Statute 42C, law enforcement has discretionary access during active child welfare investigations. If something happens to that child because you block this investigation, you'll be held liable. What Brooks didn't notice were the 4 security cameras positioned throughout the medical records department, silently recording every word, every aggressive gesture, every lie coming out of his mouth. The footage captured his raised voice, his intimidating body language, and his complete abuse of the authority his badge was supposed to represent. Sarah, feeling cornered, reached under her desk and pressed a coded page button, a silent distress signal to administration. Within minutes, Dr. Marcus Lewis appeared in the doorway. He immediately recognized Brooks from Jada's descriptions over the years, and seeing him here demanding Jada's records, Marcus knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't a legitimate investigation. This was an ex-husband abusing his badge. Marcus stepped forward professionally but firmly. "Officer, I'm Dr. Marcus Lewis, medical director. We cannot release these records without proper legal authorization. If you have a warrant, we'll comply immediately. Otherwise, I must ask you to leave." Brooks turned, anger flashing in his eyes at this new obstacle standing between him and what he wanted. Brooks stared at Dr. Lewis, his face reddening with anger at being blocked by hospital administration. "You're both obstructing a police investigation," he said, his voice sharp and threatening. "I can arrest you right now for interfering with official police business." Dr. Lewis remained calm. "You're welcome to try, officer, but we both know that's not going to happen. If you have legitimate law enforcement needs, get a warrant. That's how the law works." Brooks pointed his finger at both of them. "Fine. I'll get the warrant anyway, so you might as well cooperate now and save everyone time." He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a threat. "And just so you know, your refusal to cooperate will be documented in my official report. Your names, your positions, everything. My supervisors will know you obstructed this investigation." The implied threat of future retaliation was clear, but Sarah and Dr. Lewis stood firm, and eventually Brooks had no choice but to leave, his boots echoing angrily down the hospital corridor. But Kevin Brooks wasn't the type of man who gave up when told no. He simply waited for a better opportunity. That opportunity came on Saturday night when the hospital ran with a skeleton crew. The weekend clerk working the medical records desk was younger, less experienced, and far more easily intimidated by a police uniform and aggressive demands. When Brooks returned that Saturday evening, flashing his badge and speaking with absolute authority, the weekend clerk nervously gave him digital access to the system. Brooks sat at the terminal, and for the first time, saw everything he'd been desperate to find. Complete surgical notes from Jada's hysterectomy, post-operative medications for pain management, follow-up appointment notes detailing her recovery progress, private physician notes about her emotional adjustment to the procedure. Everything, her most intimate medical vulnerability, was laid bare before his eyes. He read through it all, lingering on details that he thought he could twist and use against her in court. What Brooks didn't know was that the hospital's digital system logged every single access, his badge number, the exact timestamp, which specific records he viewed, and how long he spent on each page. The system captured everything, creating a permanent trail of his illegal intrusion. Over the next 2 weeks, Brooks returned to the hospital 6 more times, accessing Jada's records repeatedly, 7 separate accesses in total. Each time, he spent longer reviewing the same information, reading and rereading details about her surgery and medications. The pattern didn't show a legitimate investigation, it showed obsession. But the worst violation came when digital forensics experts later examined the access logs. They discovered that Brooks had taken photographs of Jada's medical records using his personal cell phone. He'd screenshotted the most private details of her surgery and recovery. And then, in an act of breathtaking cruelty, he'd forwarded those photos to his new girlfriend, adding his own commentary. "See? Told you she's a mess." He'd turned his ex-wife's medical trauma into gossip, sharing her most vulnerable moments with someone who had no right to see them. Every click, every screenshot, every illegal access, all of it was being documented by systems Brooks didn't understand and cameras he never noticed. He thought he was gathering ammunition. Instead, he was building the evidence that would destroy him. 3 weeks after her surgery, Jada was home focusing on recovery. The physical healing was happening, but slowly. She moved carefully through her small house, still feeling soreness and fatigue that reminded her to take things easy. She'd been spending quiet time with Maya, reading books together on the couch and watching movies, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy after the trauma of surgery and the ongoing stress of divorce. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about legal cases or court deadlines. She was just trying to heal. Then her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Marcus Lewis. "Jada, it's Marcus." His voice sounded tense, urgent. "We need to talk. It's urgent. Can you come to the hospital?" Something in his tone made her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" "I can't explain over the phone. Please, can you come in today?" An hour later, Jada walked slowly into Marcus's office, still moving carefully from the surgery. Sarah Thorne was already there, standing near the window. Both of them looked distressed, their faces showing the kind of concern that made Jada's heart beat faster. Marcus gestured for her to sit down. "Jada, your ex-husband came here demanding your medical records. He used his badge to pressure our staff, claiming it was official police business." Jada's face remained still, processing. "And?" "We refused," Sarah said quickly. "Dr. Lewis and I both told him he needed a warrant. We followed protocol exactly." Marcus took a breath. "But he came back when we weren't here. Saturday night skeleton crew. He intimidated the weekend clerk into giving him digital access to the system." Silence filled the room. Jada sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap. It wasn't shock. She knew Kevin's capacity for violation, knew how far he'd go when he wanted control. But this crossed a line even she hadn't anticipated. Her hands trembled slightly as she finally spoke. "How much did he see?" Marcus's expression was pained. "Everything. Complete surgical notes from your hysterectomy, medications, post-operative recovery notes, follow-up appointments, everything." For just a moment, Jada the lawyer disappeared. She was just Jada, the woman whose body's most vulnerable moment had been violated by the man who once stood at an altar and promised to protect her. The man who was Maya's father. The man who knew she'd been recovering from major surgery and decided to weaponize that vulnerability against her. She felt nauseated, her chest tight. Then the fury took over. Cold, controlled, professional fury. Marcus pulled up the security footage on his computer screen. "We have video of his first attempt when we refused him." Jada watched the screen as Kevin appeared, in uniform, using his badge like a weapon. She watched him lean over Sarah's desk, threatening, intimidating, lying about child endangerment investigations. She watched him try to bully his way into accessing her most private information. Something shifted in her expression. The victim vanished and the attorney emerged. "I need copies of everything," Jada said, her voice suddenly clinical and professional. "All security footage from every camera, complete digital access logs showing exactly what he viewed and when. Any communications between staff, written statements from everyone involved. I need it all documented, preserved, and backed up to off-site storage immediately." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. They'd just watched Jada transform before their eyes. "We already started the preservation process," Marcus said quietly. "We knew you'd need it." Jada stood slowly, steadying herself. "Good, because Kevin just made the biggest mistake of his life." That evening, Jada sat at her home office desk with the evidence spread before her, analyzing everything with the surgical precision of a lawyer who'd spent 15 years mastering this exact area of law. She began listing the violations, her pen moving across her legal pad with steady confidence. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, 18 U.S.C. At 10:30, unauthorized access to a computer system to obtain information. Criminal HIPAA violations, 42 U.S.C. at 1320 D6, knowingly obtaining protected health information without authorization. Civil rights violation under 42 U.S.C. at 1983, abuse of authority under color of law. State privacy torts, including intrusion upon seclusion and public disclosure of private facts. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Each violation carried its own penalties, its own path to accountability. But the evidence got even worse when Marcus sent over additional materials the hospital's legal team had uncovered. Communications between Kevin and his divorce attorney revealed his entire plan. Use the medical records in the custody hearing to argue that Jada was emotionally unstable and physically compromised from the surgery. His attorney had already prepared questions about her medical issues to present in court, designed to make her appear unfit to care for Maya. Jada assembled the evidence methodically. Security footage from 4 different cameras showing Kevin's aggressive confrontation with Sarah and Dr. Lewis. complete with clear audio of his lies and threats. Digital access logs with precise timestamps showing 7 separate intrusions, each one tagged with Kevin's badge number as verification. Written statements from Sarah Thorne, Dr. Marcus Lewis, and the weekend clerk who'd been intimidated into giving access. An email trail showing Kevin had sent copies of her records to his personal email account. And perhaps most damaging, text messages between Kevin and his new girlfriend, where he literally wrote about using her surgery against her and called her a mess. Jada knew she couldn't handle this alone, despite her expertise. This case was too personal, and she needed the best team possible. She called Patricia Rodriguez, a former federal healthcare fraud prosecutor who'd moved into private practice and had a reputation for aggressive litigation. She brought in James Chen, a digital forensics expert who'd track every electronic footprint Kevin had left. And she contacted Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a HIPAA compliance specialist who served as an expert witness in privacy cases across the country. The strategy session happened 2 days later in Patricia's office. After reviewing all the evidence, Patricia leaned back in her chair and shook her head in amazement. "Jada, this is the cleanest case I've seen in 20 years of practice. Usually there's some ambiguity about whether the access was authorized or whether there was a legitimate law enforcement purpose. Here, he's your ex-husband accessing your medical records in the middle of a custody dispute. There's literally no legitimate justification he can offer." James Chen nodded, reviewing the digital logs on his laptop. "The pattern is obsessive. 7 accesses over 2 weeks, spending hours reviewing the same records repeatedly. This isn't an investigation. This is stalking." All evidence was backed up to 3 separate secure locations with encrypted copies. Chain of custody was documented for every piece of evidence. James created a detailed timeline showing the pattern of Kevin's access, correlating it with custody hearing dates, and his communications with his attorney. Jada looked at the assembled evidence, the expert team, the airtight case. Kevin had tried to use her vulnerability as a weapon. Instead, he just handed her everything she needed to destroy him. 1 week later, the federal lawsuit was filed in U.S. District Court. The complaint named Kevin Brooks in his individual capacity, the City Police Department, Police Chief Thomas Waldron for failing to properly supervise and initially Mercy General Hospital for the weekend security breach that had allowed the illegal access. The claims were devastating in their breadth. Federal HIPAA violations for knowingly obtaining protected health information without authorization. Fourth Amendment violations for illegal search and seizure of private medical data. Civil rights deprivation under color of law for abusing his police authority. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, invasion of privacy. Each charge was supported by mountains of evidence, video footage, digital logs, witness statements, and Kevin's own text messages. The lawsuit demanded $2 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages, plus injunctive relief requiring comprehensive policy changes at the police department to prevent future abuses. Patricia Rodriguez held a press conference at Jada's law firm to announce the filing. The media coverage exploded instantly. Attorney Sue's ex-husband cop for illegal medical records access dominated local news. The optics were absolutely devastating for Kevin Brooks. A decorated police officer caught on camera abusing his badge to illegally access his sick ex-wife's most private medical information during a custody battle. It was the kind of story that made people furious. Kevin's attorney quickly issued a statement claiming this was routine law enforcement access and accusing Jada of vindictive litigation meant to damage his reputation. But the statement was weak and unconvincing. There was no explanation for why a police officer needed his ex-wife's hysterectomy records. No details about what investigation supposedly justified 7 separate accesses over 2 weeks. No response to the text messages where he discussed using her surgery against her in court. The public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Social media erupted with women sharing their own stories of ex-husbands or ex-boyfriends using medical information as weapons against them. Healthcare workers posted about the constant pressure they faced from police trying to bypass proper legal procedures. Privacy advocates rallied around Jada's case as a perfect example of why HIPAA protections mattered, and why even law enforcement wasn't above the law. The police department launched an internal affairs investigation. At first, department leadership was defensive, releasing statements about supporting their officers. But as the evidence became public, especially the security footage and the text messages, that defense crumbled. The violations were too clear, too well documented, too obviously personal, rather than professional. Kevin was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. Mercy General Hospital moved quickly to protect itself. The weekend clerk who'd given Kevin access was immediately fired for violating HIPAA protocols. The hospital implemented new security measures requiring two-person verification for any law enforcement records request. Their legal team reached out to Jada's attorneys, offering to settle separately and acknowledging they'd failed in their duty to protect patient privacy. They knew they'd messed up, and they wanted to limit the damage. But Kevin Brooks had nowhere to hide. Every door that might have protected him was closing. Every defense he might have used was demolished by his own documented actions. The lawsuit was public, the evidence was undeniable, and his career was collapsing around him. Kevin Brooks's deposition lasted 6 brutal hours. Patricia Rodriguez sat across the table from him, methodically destroying every defense he tried to construct. You accessed medical records for your ex-wife, Jada Reeds. Correct? I had legitimate investigative concerns, Kevin answered, his voice trying to sound official and professional. What crime were you investigating? Possible child endangerment. Based on what evidence? Confidential sources. Patricia didn't pause. Your daughter told you her mother was in the hospital during a visitation weekend. That was your source, correct? Kevin shifted in his seat. I can't reveal confidential sources. Patricia slid a document across the table. You sent screenshots of Miss Ed Reed's medical records to your girlfriend using your personal cell phone, correct? The room went silent. Kevin's face went pale as he realized they had his phone records, his text messages, everything. I may have shared some information. You texted, and I quote, C told you she's a mess. You were referring to your ex-wife's hysterectomy, correct? Kevin's attorney quickly interjected, calling for a break, but the damage was already done. The personal hatred, the malicious intent to humiliate Jada. All of it was now established on the official record. When testimony resumed, James Chen, the digital forensics expert, presented his findings in devastating detail. 7 separate accesses to Jada's medical records over 14 days. Total time Kevin spent reviewing those records, 3 hours and 47 minutes. Screenshots taken using his personal phone camera. Records emailed from the hospital system to his personal email account. Private medical information shared with an unauthorized third party, his girlfriend, who had absolutely no legal right to see it. Then came the smoking gun. Emails between Kevin and his divorce attorney explicitly discussed using her medical issues in the upcoming custody case. The communications proved beyond any doubt that this wasn't a legitimate investigation. It was a deliberate attempt to weaponize Jada's private health information against her in family court. Dr. Marcus Lewis took the stand and described Kevin's aggressive behavior at the hospital, his threats, his lies about child endangerment investigations. Sarah Thorne testified about how Kevin had tried to intimidate her into violating federal law, moving into her personal space, and suggesting there would be consequences if she didn't cooperate. Even the weekend clerk, though admitting his own failure, testified about how intimidated he'd felt by Kevin's uniform and badge, how the officer had made it seem like refusing would be a crime. Finally, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a nationally recognized HIPAA compliance expert, delivered testimony that sealed Kevin's fate. There is no legitimate law enforcement exception that would allow an officer to access his ex-wife's medical records, particularly during active custody litigation, she stated clearly. This is textbook abuse of access. Every element of proper procedure was violated. This represents exactly the kind of privacy invasion that federal law was designed to prevent. The deposition transcript read like a confession. Every question had backed Kevin further into a corner. Every answer had exposed another lie. Every piece of evidence had proven malicious intent. Kevin had thought his badge made him untouchable. Instead, it made his crimes federal. Kevin Brooks's legal defense completely collapsed under the weight of evidence. His attorney sat him down and delivered the hard truth. Settle now to avoid criminal prosecution, or fight and face federal prison time. Kevin wanted to fight, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, but his attorney showed him the reality. There was no defense. The evidence was overwhelming, documented, and undeniable. The federal prosecutor reviewed the case and made a decision quickly. Criminal charges would be filed for HIPAA violations and computer fraud. Kevin Brooks was facing potential prison time, and no amount of denial would change that. The settlement negotiations happened in stages, and each one stripped away another piece of Kevin's life. The personal settlement with Kevin required a $75,000 judgment that would be garnished from his wages for the rest of his life. He had to make a formal admission of wrongdoing. He had to issue a public apology. He had to agree not to appeal the custody decision. And he had to cooperate fully with the criminal prosecution against him. The police department's settlement was even more significant. $850,000 paid to Jada. 3 supervisors who had failed to properly train and supervise Kevin were demoted. The entire department had to undergo comprehensive HIPAA training. New protocols were established requiring a warrant plus supervisor approval before any officer could request medical records. An independent oversight committee was created to review all such requests, and Kevin Brooks was terminated with cause, which meant he lost his pension. 15 years of service erased. Mercy General Hospital settled for $400,000. The staff members who had violated protocol were fired. The hospital implemented a new 2-person authorization system for all law enforcement records requests, meaning no single employee could give access alone. Annual privacy training became mandatory for all staff. Technology upgrades were installed to automatically flag suspicious access patterns, like multiple views of the same patient's records, or access by personnel with the same last name as the patient. The custody case ended swiftly. The family court judge read the lawsuit details and the evidence of Kevin's violations. The decision was clear. Jada received full custody of Maya. Kevin was granted only supervised visitation, and even that could be reviewed if he showed further poor judgment. The judge's statement was harsh. Officer Brooks's violation of Ms. Reed's medical privacy demonstrates an alarming lack of judgment and complete disrespect for boundaries. I cannot trust someone who would do this to their ex-wife to make appropriate decisions regarding their child. Then came the criminal case. Rather than face trial, Kevin pleaded guilty to federal HIPAA violations. The sentencing hearing was brief, but devastating. 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release after that. A $50,000 fine on top of everything else he owed. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. You betrayed your badge. You violated your ex-wife at her most vulnerable moment. You showed no remorse, only excuses. This sentence reflects the severity of your abuse of authority and serves as a message that no one, not even law enforcement, is above privacy laws. Kevin was led away in handcuffs, his career destroyed, his freedom taken, his reputation permanently ruined. Jada sat in the gallery, watching. She felt no joy, only cold satisfaction that justice had been served. Kevin Brooks served 14 months in federal prison before being released early for good behavior. During that time, Jada completed her physical recovery from surgery, Maya adjusted to the new custody arrangement with therapy and support, and the settlement money arrived. Over $1 million total from the police department and hospital combined. Jada didn't keep the money for herself. Instead, she established the Healthcare Privacy Defense Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of medical privacy violations. The fund provided free legal representation to people who couldn't afford attorneys, with special focus on vulnerable populations like domestic violence survivors and marginalized communities. It created education programs teaching patients their HIPAA rights and advocated for stronger enforcement of privacy laws. The national impact was immediate and significant. Jada testified before a House committee about patient privacy and law enforcement access to medical records. The Department of Justice cited Reed's v. Brooks in their official guidance to law enforcement agencies nationwide. The case became required reading in law school healthcare privacy courses. Medical privacy advocates began referencing the Reed standard when discussing improper access to patient information. Jada's professional life transformed completely. She became the go-to expert witness in similar cases across the country. She gave keynote speeches at healthcare privacy conferences. She consulted with hospitals, implementing stronger protection systems. Her law review articles were cited by courts in other states. Harvard Law School invited her to teach as an adjunct professor, running a seminar on healthcare privacy that filled to capacity every semester. Her legal framework was used successfully in multiple copycat cases: a woman whose police officer ex-boyfriend illegally accessed her mental health records, a man whose officer friend pulled his HIV status during a workplace dispute, and a victim whose stalker ex-husband used law enforcement connections to track her medical appointments. Institutional changes rippled across the country. Police departments reviewed their medical records access policies. Hospitals implemented technology that automatically flagged potential abuse, like officers accessing records of people with the same last name. Professional licensing boards added HIPAA violations as grounds for discipline. Kevin emerged from prison to supervised release, a criminal record, and financial judgments that would follow him forever. He couldn't work in law enforcement or security. He took a warehouse position with wages garnished to pay Jada. He lived with his parents, financially devastated. Maya saw him occasionally during supervised visits, but she understood he'd hurt her mother. Eventually, he moved to another state to escape the notoriety. Dr. Marcus Lewis became Chief Privacy Officer at Mercy General. Sarah Thorne was promoted to Vice President of Compliance. Both served on Jada's fund advisory board. Jada healed in every way. Therapy helped her process the violation. She recovered fully from surgery. Her relationship with Maya grew stronger. She eventually dated again, finding a partner who deeply respected boundaries. She transformed from victim to victor, turning pain into purpose. 2 years later, Jada stood before 800 people at the National HIPAA Compliance Conference. When my ex-husband walked into that hospital and demanded my medical records, he made 3 critical mistakes. First, he assumed his badge mattered more than federal law. Second, he assumed the hospital would be too intimidated to resist. And third, his biggest mistake, he forgot that I've spent my entire career learning how to destroy people who do exactly what he did. Today, hospitals train better. Police departments think twice, and victims know they're not powerless. That's the power of the law when wielded by someone who truly knows how to use it. My pain had purpose, and that's the transformation that matters most. The audience rose in thunderous applause. Justice perfectly served.